It's nothing short of amazing how much luck plays into the success of a movie. From the script, to the production team, to the director and actors, when all these different components come together, it can create an unforgettable cinematic experience. But even when these stars align, success of any kind isn't a guarantee, and the film that started out with such high hopes may not find its audience, and can end up as nary more than an afterthought. The question of what could have been lingering eternally around it. Such is the story with 1993's Once Upon a Forest, an environmentally themed animated tale about a group of young forest critters who embark on a journey to save their friend's life from a toxic gas that threatens to destroy them and their woodland home. The movie seemingly had everything needed to become a viable cartoon franchise: engaging characters supported by stellar voice acting, and a high-stakes script that subtly promoted the importance of conserving nature, which is all the more perplexing as to why it didn't catch on with moviegoers. Was the lack of enthusiasm about the movie due strictly to creative missteps made by the filmmakers? Or did it have more to do with the looming issue that doomed a large number of theatrically released cartoons during the 1990s? Whatever it may have been that affected the film's fortunes, thankfully did not take away from its quality, and what we were treated to was a gripping adventure that I believe had serious potential to be an all-time animated classic. So let's look back at the film and see if it deserves a little more recognition than it got the first time around. This is Once Upon a Forest. As the opening credits play, we're immediately greeted with the strongest aspect of the film, the musical score. Composed by James Horner, most famous for his work on major feature films including Avatar and Titanic, Horner had a notable history creating soundtracks for animation as well, including co-writing an American Tail's Grammy Award-winning song, Somewhere Out There. The movie's main instrumental theme, The Forest, is a stunning achievement. Performed by the London Symphony Orchestra, it begins with whimsy and enchantment, then segues into a playful, yet mature, explorative saunter. The sound gives me visions of flying over clouds, then lowering onto gliding over the water, the countryside, and over the largest expanses, with wind flowing to propel the listener to new heights. I'm not being hyperbolic when I say, this is one of the best arrangements I've ever heard in any animated feature. And most impressive, the rest of the compositions are equally as beautiful. Accompanying the music is the scenery, which is gorgeous in its own right. We get the first glimpse of the forest, trees with hollowed out windows and lights flickering inside. The scene is of such high quality, it transports the mind right away into being fully convinced it's an authentic world. We pan up into a tree and are introduced to a young mouse watching the sunrise. Her name is Abigail, easily identified by her overalls and short, messy haircut that reminds me of Krista's hairdo from Fern Gully, The Last Rainforest, which is an interesting coincidence. Two 90s animated pro-environment themed protagonists having similar haircuts. She's likable from the get-go. With her big eyes and cheery smile, you can't help but instantly be drawn to her. Her dad calls for her, not seeing her sneak down the tree before she pulls his tail. Irritated, he reprimands her, saying how she should be excited to get to class, but that he's glad she stopped climbing trees, as she bats her eyes saying, "Yes, Daddy," with him none the wiser of her continuing mischief. Next, we happen upon a group of young hedgehogs ravenously paw at a bowl of fruits and vegetables, except for one, Russell, who has to miss breakfast in order to avoid running late for class. Our last protagonist we meet is Edgar, a small mole who, after getting bundled in a coat and scarf by his overprotective mom, skips giving her a goodbye kiss as he runs off to class. The three convene at a tree home with a small badger in a pink dress named Michelle, who excitedly tells the group her Uncle Cornelius has a surprise for them. As is the aforementioned music and art, the voice acting is top-notch as well. Remarkably, The main voices were provided by relatively unknown child actors, save for Michelle, who was voiced by actress Kate Moss. But she wasn't even the most impressive voice actor on the bill, as we soon will see. The Furlings, as the young ones are known, enter the tree, which doubles as Cornelius's home and laboratory, littered with books and models, a staircase with the banister carved from the tree itself. This film does a masterful job making the viewer use their imagination to fill in the blanks of this unexplored society. It could be that they use tools to create their homes, or maybe it's all done naturally, or something in between. Either way, it makes this civilization feel magical. Cornelius, an elderly badger donned in a turtleneck tweed coat combination, reveals a model of his soon-to-be greatest invention, the flapper wingamathing, that he someday hopes to build to full size. Russell and Abigail fight over who should fly the toy next, chasing after it, knocking over books and chairs, before it falls into Edgar's hands, and is subsequently crushed by the ironically titled book, Gravity. Despite his frustrations, Cornelius takes the Furlings out into the forest, but stops Michelle just short of running out beyond the brush, as a short distance beyond is a metal cage. It's dark and rusted and ominous in its stillness, threatening from the sight alone, but all the more amplified by the previous music dissipating into a low hum, punctuated with a snake's rattle and a hawk screech. Cornelius attempts to explain how everything they need can be found in nature, a nice line to influence both the children in and out of the movie. But his words fall on deaf ears as the kids goof off, leading to him considering calling off the big surprise. But the Furlings plead to let them continue on, and it's such a little kid way of addressing the issue they themselves created. Even though they acted up, they still want their prize. It's very true to childlike logic, which makes their relationship with Cornelius feel layered with history that they feel like they can get into trouble, but still possibly convince him to keep his promise. Abigail and Russell run ahead, arguing whose turn it is to lead, before falling onto a new area they haven't seen before. To them, it feels hard and smells funny, but to us, we clearly recognize it as a road. Cornelius, well aware of the perilous section they've stumbled onto, screams for them to get off the road, right before a car narrowly misses them, adding insult to injury by throwing a glass bottle in its wake. The deadliness of the car and littering is on full display. Even as the animals make their escape, the bottle remains, a stark reminder of its potential lethalness. As the group gets back on track, Cornelius finally reveals the surprise, a boat he's fashioned from the surrounding foliage. And right on cue, Russell and Abigail fight over who gets to steer, and her cocky attitude escalating the push and pull between them. As Cornelius preaches the importance of teamwork, we cut to a tanker on the road carrying poison gas, running over the earlier broken bottle, and careening over the edge of the cliff. It's jarring to watch in that it's shown quickly, but in a slow, calculated way. There's no quick cuts or fighting the steering wheel. It's a simple concept in that even the smallest indiscretion against nature can quickly compound into having more dangerous consequences. The bottle punctures the tire, and unable to turn, the truck rolls off the side of the road. Sometimes the real-world unfolding of events is more shocking than any action sequence could ever be. The man driving the truck runs to get help, and an interesting note, he and the rest of the people in the movie are never shown from the neck up, allowing the viewer to place themselves in the shoes of the faceless invaders. The noxious gas begins to permeate through the forest, instantly wilting any plants it comes into contact with. The sound it makes is a constant hiss, playing under the sound of fleeing animals in the distance, as it makes its way through the open door of a forest home. In the year before, Fern Gully: The Last Rainforest, another environmentally themed animated film, used pollution as its antagonist in the form of an anthropomorphic cloud who would sing and use machines to further his nefarious scheme. Though similar, Once Upon a Forest takes a different approach, as this gas doesn't have a face or sing songs, and certainly no bias, as it kills everything in its path. It may not be as fun, but in exchange, it provides a more tangible danger. The Furlings flip the boat due to their infighting and return to shore to the sight of birds evacuating the area and silence in the air. They hurry home, and the music is so tense and the choir is haunting. It heightens the fear and panic of the moment as Michelle runs into her home to find her parents. Against Cornelius's warnings, Abigail goes in after to rescue Michelle and receives quite the unexpected shock of seeing the little badger's parents slumped over in the kitchen. It's a traumatic sight, made more so that they're not struggling or writhing in pain. They're out cold. To what degree is yet to be seen, but this is a very realistic outcome that wouldn't be expected in a kid's movie. Abigail sees Michelle also collapsed on the floor and drags her out. Again, the music overtaking the scene as the star, with Cornelius admitting, "For once, I'm glad you didn't listen to me." That night, as Cornelius tends to Michelle, the Furlings find that their families are all missing, with an extra serving of heartache from Edgar, mentioning how he was in such a hurry during the morning he didn't kiss his mom goodbye. To a child watching, it's sad within the moment, but to an older viewer, it's something that hits you especially hard, that these small gestures you take for granted are the ones you'll end up pining for the most. And he may not realize it in that moment, but that regret will stay with him forever. And when the three come to terms that they might be all they have, the pain tone when Abigail asks Cornelius if they can stay with him for the night, the question carries with it an unspoken understanding that the lives of everyone involved have been irreparably changed. Cornelius recounts his past dealing with humans, how they came to his home, and while he and his sister escaped, his parents did not. This flashback, while short, and wisely so, elicits the use of the atmospheric music, which is so good. I still can't believe it belongs to an animated movie. It completely sets the mood for the humans' presence, that they're frightening beings. And when they're dressed in hazmat suits, with their gas tank breathing that sounds foreign to the forest, and the flashlights that when they shine and move, give an unearthly echoed ring, it's one that nobody could possibly forget. With Michelle's condition worsening, Cornelius sends the Furlings off to retrieve the life-saving herbs necessary to help her recover, but warns that they only have 2 days' time to do so. When Edgar asks in shock if they'll be alone, Cornelius says they will have each other. A powerful statement indeed. Cornelius sings to a sleeping Michelle about how she's in the morning of her life and that he's in the evening, as he begs her to wake up singing, "Once I had a morning too. I was young once just like you. It's evening in my life. All I have is the night, but it'd still be morning for you." It's a powerfully emotional song, with a weighty voice behind it, due to Cornelius' part being played by Michael Crawford, known famously for playing the lead role in the original Broadway run of The Phantom of the Opera. There's heaviness in the way he sings this touching song that, like many of the difficult moments scattered throughout the film, successfully strikes that tragic line for children and adults alike. My only complaint with the song isn't its content or vocals. It's the context of when it appears. This is the first song of the movie. Looking at Disney movies of the 90s by comparison, The Lion King, Mulan, Hercules, all of these movies started with songs. They were of varying tempos, but helped establish that they were musicals. This song doesn't start until 20 minutes in, and that it's a more somber tone isn't a strike against it, but to be the first piece sung so late into the movie nonetheless, I believe there could have been an alternative method to integrate it more appropriately, which I'll be discussing later. After packing supplies for their journey, the Furlings head out into the night, first encountering a barren field with a tree at the center. Abigail prods the team to make their way across the landscape, and as they do, a red and blue eye emerge from the inside of a hole high up in the tree. As the three argue about carrying the supplies, a guttural squawk begins to pierce the air, growing closer to them. It turns out to be an owl, and before they're able to react, it grabs a hold of Abigail, taking her back into its tree, and once in there, she's able to temporarily stave it off by stabbing it with the thorn. Between the throaty screeching and the scar and discolored eyes, this owl is intimidating as be all. With the owl closing in on her, Abigail pulls out a magnifying glass taken from Cornelius and places it up to her teeth, making them look large and sharp, snarling and scaring the owl, who knocks her out of the tree and onto her friends, all to the sounds of an anxiety-ridden backing track. The three of them escape under a log, resulting in Edgar yelling at Abigail how it's the last time she gets them into trouble. But before he can even finish, she apologizes and thanks them for rescuing her. But it's such a shift in her personality, she no longer gives off that brave, adventurous spirit, and reverts into an almost demure state, which could make for a solid redemption arc for her, but unfortunately, this state she finds herself in is never touched upon again. As the Furlings rest, they're awoken by a traveling funeral procession, headed by an infectious stork preacher, who testifies one of their flock will soon be resigned to their doom. The bird in question is a young bird named Bosworth, who's been stuck in the mud due to the mysterious yellow dragons who have drained the marsh. The goodbye mother from the Coke bottle glasses wearing Bosworth still makes me laugh, sounding one part sad, but another part loving the attention he's receiving. Inspired by the stork preacher's sermon, Edgar begins to testify, claiming they can save the little bird by using a seesaw, and when the trio are successful, it prompts the congregation into breaking out into a gospel song, "He's Back," and it's a catchy, upbeat song that even gets Edgar dancing. It may not have enough words to conventionally sing along to, but it feels as inspired and spontaneous as you might get if you were actually to go to a church like this. The priest directs them to their desired meadow, but warns it's past the land of the yellow dragons, huge monsters that breathe fire and brimstone. Undeterred, the three press on, until they finally encounter the yellow dragons, which end up being construction equipment, cranes, steamrollers, and other heavy machinery. I love when objects we find as ordinary are given these mythical names and misinterpretations. And for the yellow dragons to be something as simple as construction equipment, it's such a fun payoff. After escaping their misidentified captors, the three end up in a lush meadow, their trek briefly interrupted by a pack of squirrels and mice fighting over an acorn. Abigail pulls one of the mice down from a tree and lands on top of him, and he starts to yell at her until he turns around and sees her face, both of them instantly smitten with each other. He apologizes to her for being pulled out of the tree, and she gives the most lovey eyes and voice and can barely formulate sentences in between blushing and twirling her hair. It's never addressed beyond this singular moment, which makes it even sillier than it would normally be. When a snotty squirrel accuses the three of being lying thieves, Edgar stands up for their venture and tells the squirrel to step aside. It's an action that shows his determination, but much like Abigail's temporary personality shift, it's never mentioned before, so we can't assume that this is out of the ordinary behavior from him, and it's never touched upon again, which does end up making it a little less impactful. The last herb they need is on the side of a high-up cliff, and Russell proclaims they'll be able to retrieve it and already have a plan, which prompts the squirrel to insult Russell, just like a hedgehog, big mouth and no brain. This squirrel is a fun foil, an insult flying out of his mouth every time he opens it, and the more he talks, the more you hope the gang succeeds just to see his reaction. This would also be a good point to address Russell's feelings of not being given a chance to be taken seriously, but that isn't addressed, and that speaks to a larger point about the lack of character arcs throughout the film. There are a plethora of qualities within the characters that seemingly had been set up to have been tackled with rewarding payoffs at multiple points, but instead, they're insinuated, but never acted upon. Satisfying conclusions to each of their struggles would have been fun to see, but alas, we never do get those loose ends tied up in any meaningful fashion. They do, however, plan to build Cornelius's flapper from the schematics they brought with them, and we get a happy montage of them working together that is just so warm to watch the powers of teamwork and friendship at play. Now complete, the machine, which looks great and should definitely have been made into a real-life toy, shoots into the sky, with Russell piloting and the other two flapping the wings. Nearing the herb, Abigail volunteers to go onto the wing and grab it in place of Edgar, but the mole's scarf comes off and lands on Russell, impairing his vision and causing the flapper to crash into the cliffside. The force of the collision knocks Abigail off, and her scream, extended by the echoing in the deep canyon, and you can hear the mortality in her voice. She manages to fall onto the wing, and Edgar pulls her to safety, grabbing the last ingredient they need as they fly home, the squirrel watching in disappointed arms crossed from the ground. The road home is calming, flying over the mountains and the land of the yellow dragons, but a rolling storm causes them to fly into an electrical transformer, leading them to crash down to the earth. Thankfully though, no one is hurt, and it turns out they're nearby their home. They make their way back to Cornelius, but their reunion is interrupted by humans investigating the surrounding area. In the process of their escape, Edgar loses his coat and glasses and reverts back to his animalistic state, frantically scattering and no longer talking, but whimpering in fear, as he stumbles into the cage, completely at the mercy of his human captor, with the mask breathing and beam of light blinding the small mole. Luckily, a kind hand reaches down, letting Edgar free and stomping the cage, and it turns out this human was part of a cleanup crew, presumably from the gas, which leaves Cornelius in happy awe. I do wish here they would somehow communicate that the humans were responding to the toxic gas. That way there's resolution on that storyline, but it's easy enough to infer regardless. The group sleeps as Cornelius applies the medicine to Michelle, and the next morning, she wakes up healthy. In more jubilation, Cornelius sees the flapper fully built and remarks how much they've grown up in the past 2 days. Behind them, the brush begins to part, as the forest critters return, including Abigail and Russell's families, but Michelle's parents do not, which Cornelius says to her that he can't replace them, but he'll do his best as she cries into his chest. Such a mature choice for a kids movie. It's really refreshing to see. After a short fake out, Edgar's mom finally comes through the brush, and he gets to give her the goodbye kiss he thought he'd missed out on. Michelle says nothing will ever be the same, but Cornelius tells her as long as they work hard to save their forest as her friends did to save her, it will be. A fitting, hopeful end in the face of great tragedy. Once Upon a Forest's theatrical release ended in a disappointing box office haul, making a little over $6.5 million against a $16 million budget. A number of reasons can be made for its commercial failure, and for that, I point to two factors. The first is that it wasn't a Disney movie, which wouldn't initially seem like a major contributor, but in the early 90s, Disney dominated the animated cinematic market, with 1991's Beauty and the Beast, 1992's Aladdin, and 1994's The Lion King, which combined to make almost $2 billion. In that same 3-year span, an overwhelming amount of animated features released by other studios lost massive amounts of money. A Troll in Central Park, Rock-a-Doodle-Doo, The Swan Princess, Thumbelina, and We're Back, A Dinosaur Story, went on to lose a cumulative total of $80.6 million. Now, it is possible that even with the Disney brand attached, they still wouldn't have achieved mainstream success, but it would be reasonable to assume it would have given them more of a fighting chance. The other potential component to it not catching on as widely is that the movie is short, running at an hour and 10 minutes, with credits included. Budget and time constraints unfortunately hampered extra content they wanted to include, and with an extra 20 minutes, that could have changed things significantly for the film. In the spirit of what could have been, I'm going to give my idea of how some of the shortcomings the movie encountered could have been shored up. This isn't to say it would have made the movie any better or more successful, but the suggestions offered here are to fill out the movie to an hour and a half and make it into a more complete film. The movie would start the same way with the Furlings introduced, but this time, their parents would make it a point to comment on their flaws and insecurities. Abigail's dad would comment on how although she's fearless, she needs to consider consequences to her actions. Russell would be upset that he's not taken seriously, and Edgar would want to shake the feeling that he's too attached to his mother and needs to grow up and become his own person. And while the kids run to school, we could get a song that each of them sing, running through the forest, getting to see the inhabitants and quirky world they live in, and learn a little bit more about the characters. Well, from the get-go, installing the expectation that this will be a musical film, and bringing up the song count, which in a typical Disney movie is anywhere from 5 to 7 total. When they meet Cornelius, maybe highlight how Russell and Abigail argue relentlessly and how Michelle wants to explore, but Edgar is too nervous to chaperone her because of how scared he is of the world. And Cornelius can sing a song to teach them to work as a team, maybe make their canoe a sailboat so we can see their follies as they attempt to unite for a common goal. After the tanker truck slides off the road and leaks the poison gas and Abigail rescues Michelle, that night, rather than having Cornelius' song, we would immediately follow the Furlings to their encounter with the owl. Instead of having Abigail captured, it would be Russell who is captured, and once freed, Edgar would get angry at her, and internally, she would start to second guess herself, not wanting her decisions to put her friends at risk. As the three go to sleep for the night, this is when Cornelius would sing Please Wake Up, which I believe would make sense as a third song, giving that poignant punch. We'd continue through the funeral procession, then through the land of yellow dragons, and end up in the meadow where they meet the squirrels and the mice, who have their own song, the fourth in total, about competing for food and everything else in their world. And the Furlings can try and teach them to work together instead of fighting all the time like they frequently do. Edgar would stand up to the rude squirrel, showing the beginning of his independence with his mother no longer by his side, and Russell would take the lead on building the flapper, as the other critters would laugh him off. The three would get the herb, inspiring the mice and squirrels to work together as they fly away, and we would see shots of the locations they had visited, and the friends below singing their praises and hoping they get back in time to save Michelle, which would be the fifth song, and that can lead to them flying through the storm. With them nearly done for, a normally brash Abigail would doubt herself due to the owl incident, but this time, she would concoct a plan that would save them, rather than something she would have recklessly thrown together before. After landing and encountering the humans and Michelle coming back to life, the families would return, with Russell's family impressed by how he built and flew the flapper and agree to give him more responsibility. But the biggest change would be Edgar's mom not returning, and he would live with Cornelius as a student, and instead of relying on his mother, he would act as an older brother to the now orphaned Michelle. The reason I give this alternate version of the story is because of how much I love the original movie. Its characters feel mature for their ages, while maintaining childlike sensibilities. The soundtrack is sublime, and it tells a story that left me wanting to follow their lives beyond the credits. And to most people, it may just be another movie that they saw as a kid and nothing else, but to me, it'll always be a classic.